Once we feel comfortable identifying the pieces that build sentences, we can identify different types of sentences and how to craft each type. The first sentence type is called simple. A simple sentence is simply one independent clause. Kara raised her hand. Apple-scented shampoo gives me a headache and makes my pet parrot vomit. To make sure the group of words form an independent clause, first identify the subject, Kara, apple-scented shampoo, and make sure the noun or noun phrases form a whole. Here we have apple-scented shampoo, describing words really representing a single thing, which is shampoo, a kind of shampoo. And here we have a single word, Kara. So we have a whole subject and a whole subject. Next, make sure the verb and verb completers are a whole. Raised her hand. Raised is a transitive verb that needs an object. We raise things. We in fact have an object, so this predicate is whole. And gives me a headache and makes my pet parrot vomit. This is a verb phrase. There are two verbs joined by a conjunction. So this subject will be doing two things. Each one has its completers as needed. So here we have a whole predicate. So finally, we place this sentence on the line to test for completeness. They refused to believe the idea that Kara raised her hand. Having passed our completeness test, having made sure that our subject is whole and our predicate is whole, we can be sure that we have an independent clause, and according to our definition, that independent clause alone makes a simple sentence. So here's our first sentence type, a simple sentence. Our next sentence type is a compound sentence. A compound sentence consists of two or more independent clauses joined by coordinating conjunctions. Remember, coordinating conjunctions are any one of these words: nor, or, so, yet, for, and, but, or fanboys, if you prefer that acronym. Compound sentences also require appropriate punctuation, commas that go before a coordinating conjunction between the two independent clauses. So here's an example. We have, she raised her hand and the whole class was surprised. We also have, apple-scented shampoo gives me a headache and makes my pet parrot vomit, but the pear-scented stuff is okay. To make sure you have a compound sentence, we need to identify two independent clauses. So we're going to play the same game, looking for the same words and word groups as we have before. We'll only do it for this first sentence. In the first part, we have a subject, she, which is a pronoun. In the second sentence, we have a subject, the whole class, which is a group of words describing a class and what quality or what aspect of that class. Okay, so we have a whole subject here and a whole subject there. We look at the predicates. Raised her hand. Raised needs a direct object, which we have, and was is a linking verb that needs a complement, which we have, and surprised. And when we read them on their own, she raised her hand, the whole class was surprised, we hear that they are complete. Now we can determine we have two independent clauses joined by one of these fanboys, an and. And before this and, we see placed a comma. So we have an independent clause, a coordinating conjunction, an independent clause separated by a comma. This sounds like our definition for a compound sentence. The last thing we want to do is apply our test for completeness. They refused to believe the idea that she raised her hand and the whole class was surprised. Sounds complete, so we have a compound sentence. The next sentence type is a complex sentence. A complex sentence consists of only one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. Here's an example. When she raised her hand, the whole class was surprised. Remember, a dependent clause is a clause that contains a subject and a predicate, but also contains a subordinator, a subordinating conjunction in this case. So here we have our dependent clause, when she raised her hand, which depends upon something else completing it. The whole class was surprised. Here's another example. My pet parrot vomits whenever she encounters apple-scented shampoo. We have our independent clause, my pet parrot vomits. This is what she does. And we have our dependent clause, she encounters apple-scented shampoo, subordinated by whenever. Notice that when the dependent clause appears first, we place a comma between the dependent clause and the independent clause. And when the independent clause appears first, we do not need a comma. The dependent clause simply follows the independent clause. The last thing we want to do is to make sure our complex sentence passes our completeness test. They refused to believe the idea that when she raised her hand, the whole class was surprised. Sounds complete? We have a complex sentence. The final sentence type is a compound complex sentence. The very simple way to remember this is that this is simply a complex sentence with one additional independent clause joined by a coordinating conjunction. So let's see the actual definition. We have a compound complex sentence consists of two main or independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. When she raised her hand, the whole class was surprised, and the professor waited eagerly as she began to speak. Notice how this is a complex sentence. When she raised her hand, the whole class was surprised. We could end it there. But this thought continues, and it's joined to another independent clause, the professor waited eagerly, and another dependent clause, as she began to speak. These two are joined together with this coordinating conjunction, and. The compound complex sentence is the mother of all sentences. It is the most large and inclusive of all sentence types. Notice there is a simple sentence inside of it. The professor waited eagerly. There is a complex sentence, which we've already seen. And in this case, there's actually a second complex sentence joined together. The reason it is also compound is because these two sentence types are joined together with a coordinating conjunction. So, one more time. The compound complex sentence consists of two independent clauses at least, and at least one dependent clause. What we want to finally do with a sentence like this is run it through our test. Oh, here's the other one, just in case you wanted to see it. The ending's kind of funny. Here's our test. They refused to believe the idea that when she raised her hand, the whole class was surprised and the professor waited eagerly as she began to speak. Sounds complete? We have a compound complex sentence.